My name is Monk Rowe, and we're at the Jazz Archive at Hamilton College, and I'm pleased to have Clay Jenkins with me today. And I'm wondering if you go to a cocktail party and nobody knows who you are, and they say, "So what do you do?" What's your short answer?
I would say, well, I'm a jazz musician, and I teach at a conservatory in New York called the Eastman School of Music. That's what I usually would say.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So you say you're a jazz musician first.
Yes, and you know, though I love my teaching, and I love Eastman, and I love my colleagues, and I love my students, and I really hold it in high regard in terms of my musicianship, because it's been really good for me being there. I've learned so much from my colleagues and the guests, and so and the students. So I feel like a student there. But yeah, I mean, I know that I will probably play my playing career will probably last longer than my teaching career, which is not the same with everybody. But
You think your playing career will last longer than your teaching career?
I think so. Yeah.
Okay. Because I would not have been surprised if you said the opposite.
I know. But well, we were just talking about Joe Wilder, and I was introduced to him by Snooky Young, and Snooky and I were together in the Clayton Hamilton band for 26 years, and he lived to be 90. He played until he passed away, you know, and I just saw how young it kept him. And my dad played; it kept him young. Unless I get to where I can't play very well, you know.
Yeah.
But I still feel like I'm really sort of. I feel like I want. There's a lot more music I want to write, and there's a lot more music I want to play, and I don't know where I'll be. I may be in the West Coast, or I may be in New York. I don't know where I'll be, but I do feel like I'll be playing. You know.
You could do a Doc Cheatham.
Well, you know, that's the thing. I don't want to do that either.
I know what you mean.
I want to play. I don't want to play older music. I want to play newer music when I'm older.
Wow, that's a strong statement.
Well, and I want to play. I want to play well. I don't want to play okay. And trumpet's a very physical, athletic sort of thing, so that may dictate how long I play. Snooky didn't hear very well in his last years. He didn't hear very well, and that hampered his playing a bit, but he still played really well.
It was the same with Joe, I think. He had the hearing aid thing, and but he certainly had a marvelous conception.
Yeah, I met him. He was playing with the Carnegie. No, he was playing with the Smithsonian, and I met him in Europe one time. And Snooky introduced me to him. What a gentleman he was! Wow, what a great, sweet guy.
This could be a hard question, but why I would assume the position at Eastman that you have was a fairly competitive, it's a respected university throughout the world. So why did they pick you, do you think, as opposed to someone else?
I don't know. I felt very lucky. I knew a few people there. That didn't hurt. And I knew Fred Sturm, who had been the head of the department there. I really was a fan of Harold Danko's, who is the piano teacher still there. I'd heard him with Thad Jones, who was one of my favorites. So when I heard that, when the gig, they called me. I didn't know about the job, but I went and interviewed along with 4 other guys. So I felt pretty good about it, but it was a little bit of a rude awakening once I got there. I wasn't really prepared when I got there, but in terms of being a teacher at Eastman, I taught a lot, but I wasn't as organized as I should have been. And
organization's a big part of it.
It is.
But where were you with the theoretical part of teaching jazz?
I was in a pretty good place with that. I'd been teaching a lot at some of the schools in Los Angeles, and I'd had USC and Cal Arts, and I taught at a school called the Colburn School, which is more of a classical school. And in terms of, well, I don't think you're talking specifically like music theory, but I have a degree in music theory, and so the theoretical, like harmony, like very specific harmony things, I was pretty good. I was pretty informed, but I've become a lot more informed. I've realized how uninformed I was being at Eastman, because my colleagues like Bill Dobbins and Jeff Campbell and Danko, and there's another guy named Darius Tarafinko, who they're just really informed, you know. So I was pretty well informed, but I think I've gotten much more in depth with it, and that's something I pass on to my students, really going for depth, because I've needed to go for more depth since I've been there. Yeah.
All right. Okay, I want you to think back. Well, I'm not sure when this would be, but did you have a specific moment or moments of inspiration that led you down the jazz path?
Yes. My family was pretty musical, and my father played, not professionally, but he was a good kind of part-time Dixieland trumpet player, and he really loved it. And one time it was really a moment for me. I was a kid, and he took us to Disneyland. We lived in Texas, but we were in California. Went to Disneyland, and Stan Kenton's band was playing, and I was amazed how happy people seemed. And they seemed like it was just that. It seemed like heavenly. It seemed everybody was dancing and laughing and talking, and it just seemed like, wow, this music's really making these people happy. And I was a little kid, and then he took me to a place called Shelley's Manhole when I was a kid, and I heard Milton Jackson. I heard the MJQ, Modern Jazz Quartet. Ray Brown was playing, and that was pretty amazing. I was just a little kid, you know, but it was just amazing how I felt like the music made people feel better. So I think that's what kind of got me onto it. And then I became a musician, and I liked how you could make mistakes in jazz, you know, and it wasn't the end of the world. Whereas if I made a mistake on the Haydn Trumpet Concerto, oh my gracious, you know, what next? You know, when's the next one coming? So I really like that. Not having to worry about so many mistakes.
And that the audience didn't hear them like they would hear them in a Haydn Trumpet Concerto.
Yes, because I didn't hear them. I didn't hear Milt Jackson making mistakes. And he seemed to be having such a great time. And I'll tell you something else. I was brought up in West Texas, and it wasn't a very diverse area racially, but my dad and mom were very open about that, you know, about difference, the beauty of difference in races, and I loved being around African American people. My dad had some African American. I just loved that, and I loved hearing guys play together, and I saw what good friends they were, and I hadn't seen that before, and I've always loved that, and I experienced that with Basie, and I experienced that now with the Clayton Hamilton Band, because that's a very, for lack of a better word, mixed band. It's and we're like brothers, and I love that, you know. So.
Yeah, the Kenton Band was not like
no,
that, was it?
No, it wasn't. Not by design necessarily, but Woody and Woody and Stan, and even Buddy, Rich, they were pretty white bands. Not by design necessarily. Stan had a couple of African American guys in the band, but it was pretty white band, you know.
Was it? Do you think that black players would not be attracted that much to what Stan Kenton did?
Possibly, because it was sort of, we called it kind of Wagnerian jazz, you know, and I loved it, and Stan was very nice. He was one of the nicest leaders I ever worked for. He was really great. But it wasn't, it was kind of heavy, and, you know, it swung in its own way. It certainly was a different kind of swing than bass, you know. But I don't think, you know, the guys that like on Basie's band, they were very respectful of it, of Stan's band, but it was sort of it wasn't a band that, it just seemed like it was kind of a wider band, sort of like Woody.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah, you had said, I'd read something about you like to go off with your mistakes. So I got a whole CD full of your mistakes. We'll listen to in a moment. Just kidding.
A lot of mistakes.
I'm going to backtrack a little bit. You talked about when you got to Eastman, you needed to bone up on your theory some, get more informed about that. Do you think it changed the way you improvised?
Yes, I feel it. It's continuing to. I just, I still sort of consider myself an ear player to a degree, but I want to be an informed ear player. I mean, I know the changes of songs, and I don't play tunes I don't know. And I know a lot of songs, and I can play piano well enough to comp for my students, and so my colleagues are very informed, like Bill Dobbins, Bill and Harold and Darius and Jeff. Jeff's the bass teacher, but they're very informed. I'm sort of probably the loose cannon of the bunch in terms of theory. I'm not quite as literal as them, maybe, but piano players maybe are more literal. I don't know, but they're all different too. All the three of those guys, but. My ears got better, I think, having been at Eastman for 16 years, and I've had to kind of, I've decided I'm paying more close attention to details, and then especially when I'm practicing, and then when I go to play, I think it comes out better, even though I go against the grain harmonically quite a lot. I think it's better for me to know those details better, so.
When you go against the grain, which I like that term, do you make a specific choice? What's that going to be? I'm not sure I can be specific about it. If it's a C9 chord, are there formulas to go against the grain with that?
Yes, to a degree, but mine's more of it's a little bit more serendipitous, and it's to me it's more, it's not chord by chord, it's more contextual. Like I tell my students, and I try to be myself too, is more compositional improvisationally. So using the melody of the tune might steer me in a different way musically than following the changes per se, and it might go against the grain that way. And to me, the melody kind of trumps the changes at that point. So some people may not agree with that. I'm sure they don't. Some people may think that I'm, you know, not following them close enough. So I definitely. It's all relative, you know, because sometimes people have said to me, you know, like when I used to do recording sessions in Los Angeles, people would say, this needs to be like right down the middle, and I'd play what I thought was right down the middle, and they'd say, well, that's not what we were looking for, you know. So
this was on people's jazz dates?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So,
you know, different people have different. I've had people come up and say, you know, I didn't write a sharp 9 on that chord, and I'm sorry. You know, so, but some of it's sort of serendipitous too. I must say, you know, sometimes I'll try something just to see if it might stick, and it depends on the context. Like if I was called in out there in Los Angeles to play a solo, record a solo over something else, a lot of times I just say, "What are you hearing? Maybe why don't you sing me something that you're hearing?" Because I wanted to please. You know, it wasn't my time to be an artist. It was more my time to be a craftsman sometimes. So I learned that the hard way a few times. So, but if it's like on my record, or if people call me to play on a record and the music's very adventuresome, then they usually let me play the way I play. Like I play a lot with this great drummer from actually originally Rochester, Joe LaBarbera. Joe never tells me how to play. You know, Joe likes the way I play, and so I love playing with him. Now in the Clayton Hamilton band, I've been on that band for 30 years, and there was a time when I probably wasn't fitting in as well. I think probably because I wasn't as good a blues player as I needed to be, and that's something I had to revisit a lot. I still do, but now that I'm a better blues player, I feel like they just know my voice is going to be fit in certain situations, and certain situations maybe not. But John's very respectful of me, the way I play. So,
how do you revisit the blues?
I realized on the Clayton. Are you familiar with the Clayton Hamilton Jazz Orchestra? That's such a great band, and I realized that one day that I wasn't the blues player that I needed to be to really play that band right. I was okay, but I wasn't a great blues player, and I feel like every jazz musician has to be a good blues player. So I put it upon myself to be more informed and be a better blues player, and maybe study where it came from. And I did. One of the things I went to was the Mississippi Delta guys, like Son House and Robert Johnson and those guys, and I really dove into that, and I got to where I really loved it. It was a little hard to listen to at first, and then I just got to where, and Muddy Waters, and so I realized that it made me a better blues player in terms of gestures and in terms of form of the blues and in terms of nuance, and it was just, and I realized I should be playing the blues every time I play a solo. It should be. That's what I learned from the Clayton band. It's just for me, it has to have those elements of the blues, form and nuance and the blues gestures. So that to me made me a better jazz player, being a better blues player.
Oh.
Not that I'm where I want to be yet at all as a blues player. I still really am studying it. I really...
I love that statement you just made, being a better jazz player through being a better blues player. I know what you mean when you listen to Son House and Charlie Patton and all that.
Oh, man.
It takes a while to understand that. At first, I remember thinking, well, they just played 5 measures on the one chord, and
exactly.
Do they know they did that?
And there's only 3 beats in that part.
Yeah, like you have to get over that.
Exactly. But it's just so heartfelt, and the nuance was so amazing. And they were living that. And I introduced some of my young trumpet players at Eastman to some of this stuff, and I had this kid come up and he said, "I don't like this stuff, but I sure am glad you're playing it for us." and I thought, man, I was the same way. But I mean, that's not the beginning of the blues, certainly, because that was in the 30s when those guys were going, and then Muddy Waters kind of took that to Chicago, and then that was another thing with electric guitars and everything. So, but that Delta thing just really hit home with me, and I really feel like it made me a little bit more, had more validity as a player. I'm very interested in African American culture anyway. I'm always have been. So, and that was sort of the heart of the South in a really rough time, and I just think, and so much of our music, whether it be country, western, or blues, or jazz, or pop, or R&B, or it's all got that in it. So it's such a common denominator in American music that the essence of the blues is so important. We wouldn't have music if it wasn't for that.
I forget how many times I've read this quote that goes something like, "Jazz is America's only true art form."
Yeah.
And I always say, what about the blues?
Well, it came from the blues. It
Yeah.
came from the blues. You know, yeah.
The other interesting thing for a horn player, if you go to blues jam sessions, you better be ready to play in some tougher keys.
That's right.
Especially
That's
if it's
right.
guitars.
Right.
You're
Yeah. You better be. You know, I make my students. You know, we play the blues in every key every day. You know, just on your own with a metronome. You know, yeah. Be able to play what you're hearing and make. And it's also that, you know, when I was younger, I would play. I was okay, but I didn't make that statement like what we call the kind of the AAB or the you know, the consequent phrase. You know, the like so many blues songs, I left my baby and don't know what to do, with a period there, and then for a chance for the listener to absorb it, and the next 4 bars on the 4 chord, the same thing.
Yep.
We that aren't so steeped in the blues, we need to be taught that, you know. And so I bug my students about that, because they'll play the blues and they'll just be like playing all this vocabulary, and I'm like, you know, I got to hear that thing, you know.
Yeah. I have a neat thing with Clark Terry and Joe Williams talking about the blue notes.
Yeah.
You know, he's
yeah, with those worried notes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's all in the gesture too, and the nuance, you know. Yeah, and those guys on the Delta guys, they didn't know thirds and the flatted third and all that stuff. It was nuance. It was worrying that stuff, you know. So a friend of mine described it.
Right.
Worrying the third, worrying the fifth, you know. So, yeah, it's really important.
Right. I take you back to Los Angeles, and you did some studio work.
Mm.
Is that fairly high pressure?
Oh, yeah. Well, it depends on what you're doing. If we're sitting in a 40-piece orchestra and somebody's going to clam a whole note, that would be Clay Jenkins right here. I would be the one to make that mistake, because I would just get so nervous sitting in these movie date sessions. I had some really good opportunities, and it was sort of a blessing in a way, because I had some really great opportunities to be a pretty good studio player, and I just didn't have the mindset for it. So I didn't end up doing that, and I'm thankful now, because I'm a jazz musician. So when I go and do jazz records, I'm not that nervous about it. But when I would, so it depended, you know, because out there, the thing was to not make a mistake, you know, and I'm just not that good at that. So.
And you probably wouldn't see the music till you got there.
Oh no, very seldom. Which made me nervous too. I mean, you know, oh my gosh, you know, and every once in a while you get there and look at it, oh, I wish I could have seen this thing, you know. And those guys out there are so good at that. They're great at it. They're just like masters at sight reading stuff. First time playing it down, no mistakes, out the door, you know, because they have a 10 o'clock, you know. So yeah, they're fantastic musicians, but that just wasn't my thing, and it paid really well, because once you did that, then you get reuse and all that stuff. And you could, for a commercial, you could make thousands of dollars for an hour, you know. Oh. And guys they were clamoring over each other to get those jobs, and they were great at it. I do admire them so much, but that just wasn't my thing.
Do you still get occasional check in the mail?
Oh, yeah, I do.
Can you tell me something that you might hear that you go, oh, I was on that?
Oh, I did some solo. I was on a movie called Bull Durham, baseball movie, and it was just me. And it was just in one scene. And I must have played that thing 40 times, you know. I remember the guy's name was Michael Convertino. He was a composer, and it was just trumpet. That's all it was. Maybe with synthesizer or something. It was just a kind of a dramatic scene in the locker room, you know. And I've made so much money off of that thing, you know. And I didn't play it that way. I mean, it was, you know. But I just was lucky to get called for it. But I mean, I'm on some movies and stuff. But yeah. I'm not. That's not my pride, really.
Right.
You know, I love playing on records. I really love playing on records. I played on probably 100 records or more, you know, which sounds maybe like a lot, but when you talk about Snooky Young or Joe Wilder, Snooky played on 1,000 records, you know.
That used to be a hobby of mine with LPs.
Oh, yeah.
Sort of like, oh, there he is again.
There he is again.
There he is again. And
Yeah.
these guys would move from one thing to another.
Oh, yeah. Especially in New York. Snooky said he'd have like 4 sessions a day sometimes, you know. He wouldn't even go home. He'd just get a hotel room, boom, because then the next day he had a bunch. He looked at me one day and he goes, it was great. Because he was doing the Tonight Show and he had so many great things. I mean, he played on so many great records and he deserved every second of it.
Mm-hmm.
But that's what I like doing. I like playing on records. You know.
Did you learn from listening to guys like him how to play lead?
Oh, well, any trumpet player worth his salt would say Snooky Young is the father of lead trumpet playing. There's no question about it. I mean, I learned that a long time before I met Snooky Young. When I went to North Texas State University, one of my teachers' name was Jay Saunders, great trumpet player there. He's the one that got me on Kenton's band, and we're still really good friends. My son's named after Jay. But he sat me down and he said, this is Snooky Young, and that is the way you play lead trumpet, and that's that, you know. And I mean, and it was a totally different style. It wasn't, Jay had played with Kenton, and the Kenton style was totally different than Snook's, because I mean, vibrato and shakes and everything were different.
How about playing the time? Was that different?
Well, no. Well, on Basie's band, yeah, it's definitely different. But playing the time in terms of the lead trumpet player connecting with the drummer, that Snooky was the prince of that, and he was so amazing with that. And he played with all these great drummers like Sonny Payne and Joe Jones and Mel Lewis and Jeff Hamilton and Ed Shaughnessy, all these great drummers, and he played lead, and that just made the band, that connection between lead trumpet and drums was unbelievable. So he'd come right out and say, that's who I'm listening to, you know. So and everybody knew it. So it made the band swing, because if you're listening, if you're hooking up with Snooky and he's hooking up with the drummer, everything's okay. So it was, because Snooky played lead on the Clayton band for a long time. Mm-hmm. And then he played second, and then he wanted me to play his. Then I played second, which, you know, because as he got older, he didn't want to play all that high stuff. But he had unbelievable high chops, so it was very effortless for him. It just had unbelievably consistent high chops.
I have this wonderful moment with him talking with Gerald Wilson.
Yeah.
And they were talking about going from the Lunsford band.
Right, they went on and left the same day. Yeah.
To the Basie band, and Snooky said, I had to learn how to play all over
That's
again.
right, he told me that too.
No kidding.
Because he said Lunsford's band was like a show band, kind of two-beat band, you know, and Basie was in 4 swinging, you know. And he said a few times, he said, I'm not making this, and he said the guys in Basie's band said, yeah, Snooky, you're doing okay. He said, Marshall Rowe said, yeah, you're doing okay. And Snooky said, I'm not making it. And he said, yeah, you are. He did. He told me that several times that he had to. And he's the voice of that band, you know. And, you know, I tell my students, the thing with Snooks is the accent with him is what it got the dynamic of the band. The accents, where he put the accents, that was the dynamic of the band, and everything else was softer. So the accents made it dance and swing and bounce. And see, to me, and I think I'm right about this, I'm not very dogmatic about very many things, but he was on the band with Lester Young, right? And the band was all that early on. He knew Lester Young, he knew Billie Holiday, he knew all those people. And the band was in through Kansas City. Well, who was listening to Lester Young? Charlie Parker. And so to me, Lester Young's style and the Basie style is what influenced the bop style. And on accents on that beat, and that thing that just made it dance. Where the swing bands before that, the accent had been on the downbeat, like Benny Goodman and even players like Lester Young and Coleman Hawkins and Ben. It was more downbeat. Mm-hmm. But Basie's band was like was dancing, and I just think that was so incredibly important. So I give a lot of credit to Snooky.
Boy, that's stuff that. How do you point to one person from what you're describing that feel that offbeat thing? Like,
yeah,
who's responsible?
Well, I think really it was the rhythm section, and they were kind of coming. They were, the way that Basie played, because he was really a great player. But it was more that kind of boogaloo, getting. It really felt like, I don't know if boogaloo is the right word, but just.
Shuffly, jumpy thing.
Yeah, like a jump band, I really think it came from the rhythm section. That kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And so the upbeat, which is much more modern swing. That's what we still play. And people, if they have trouble with that, they have trouble with it. It's the weirdest thing, And being around Snooky, one time my wife said, you can never leave the Clayton band because you play the way you play because you sat next to Snooky Young all those years. And it's true. And Snooky, we soloed totally different. When Snooky soloed, he was more downbeat. But when he played lead, oh my gracious, it was nothing like playing in a section with Snooky Young playing lead. It was nothing like it. So he's definitely the father of that. And really, I think if you asked anybody, John Faddis or any trumpet player that is, or Byron Stripling or anybody like that, they'd say, no, it's Snooky Young. Yeah, definitely.
Well, sort of a connected question. What do you like to get from a bass player?
Interesting question. Because a lot of my very, very best friends have been bass players. Because I'm really involved with bass. I really love bass. And one of my best friends now, one of my colleagues, Jeff Campbell at the Eastman School, he's a beautiful bass player. But I've known guys. John Clayton's a great bass player, and he's one of my heroes. And a guy named Bob Bowman in Kansas City, and a guy that I was on Buddy's band with, Tom Warrington, and a friend of mine in school named George Anderson. All these guys were bass players. So, I guess just a big beat, and someone you can really trust in terms of the time and the form, and so because there's so much, especially in more modern music, there's so much responsibility to a bass player because he's really in charge. To me, he's in charge of the beat and he's in charge of the harmony, which means he's in charge of the form. Like Rufus Reed, when he's playing, he's in charge of the rhythm section. So he wouldn't say that, but he is. So that's kind of what I love, and there's the roots, and I love bass players. I do a lot of playing with cordless trio with just bass and drums. And I just like a big beat, and I love it when they're so trustworthy in terms of the form.
Good answer. like most musicians, I'm guessing you have a list of under all instruments. You have your list. I'm going to say this question from a backward standpoint. What gets people less likely to be called by you? What makes a musician sort of move down your list as far as filling a gig?
Well, if they're not a nice person. If they're not a nice person,
No.
I usually don't. We got to get along, you know. I mean, I know some really great players I wouldn't call because I just don't. They don't strike me as nice men, you know, or women. That would be the first thing. I don't like it when piano players comp too much. I like it when they don't comp very much. Harold Banko's a fantastic comper, and he doesn't comp very much at all. I mean, sometimes when he does, you don't notice it because he's just very economical.
I'm glad to hear you say that because I think sometimes musicians in small groups don't realize that, especially for piano or guitar, by not playing, they're adding a texture.
Right.
The silence is a sound in one.
That's
in
a
sense.
great point. Yeah. Harold Danko told me a great thing. He said he was playing in New York. And he did 3 nights at the Catano or something. And he said there was a very well-dressed gentleman there all 3 nights. And at the end of the 3rd night, he said, the guy walked up to him and said, "I'm not a musician. I'm a doctor." And Harold said, "Well, it's nice to meet you." And he said, "I got to tell you," he said, but if I was a piano player, I'd like to know how to lay out just like you." I thought that was great, you know. Yeah, you're right. By not playing, they're adding a texture. You're so right. And another thing I tell my guys, you know, there's something about a trio. There's something very special about a trio. That's the art of the trio. But there's something special about a trio. Well, if a horn player is playing with a group and everybody's playing, then he doesn't get a trio. So I like it when piano players don't play because then I get a trio. I like having a trio because there's very special nuance and magic that happens with a trio. So when a piano player doesn't play or the guitar player doesn't play, then I've got the trio. Or if the drummer doesn't play, but piano players tend not to do that, you know. So I really encourage them to get out of there.
Do you actually suggest that to them sometimes?
I do to my students.
Yeah. Well,
You
if
know?
no one's ever told them, I think it's so obvious that people don't actually think of it.
Yeah.
Like it's more like it's wrong to not play.
Right.
Like there's something. Gee, I'm not playing. This isn't right.
Oh, I've had students like get mad at me for telling them to lay out. I had students say, you know, even if there's the guitar player's comping, some piano players want to comp too. So yeah, I agree. That's a great point. Yeah.
Well, do you remember in Downbeat magazine they used to do the blindfold test?
Yes.
Okay. Well, I have one.
Uh-oh.
I have a couple for you,
Okay.
but I don't think they're.
Sounds sort of like Clifford to me.
Yes, indeed. This is his. I think they're going to be coming in any moment here.
With the strings.
Yes.
Yes.
There we go.
Yeah.
Like Clifford Brown.
Oh man, yeah. What a gentleman he was. And we, in studying him, we I think we realized he wasn't as steeped in some of the bop tradition as some of the other guys like Kenny Durham or something like that in terms of harmony, but he was just such a beautiful player. He's what I think of as being more of a diatonic player, and some guys would disagree with me on that. but he didn't get in the cracks as much as like a KD or even a early Miles or Dizzy or Fats.
Mm-hmm.
Even though Fats was a huge influence to Clifford, huge. Early, I mean, you know, if you listen to Fats records, Fats Navarro records, a lot of times you'd swear it was Clifford, you know.
Yeah.
But but he was just such a beautiful player. He played with such a sound, and he was a very giving player.
Okay, here's another one.
That's me. I don't. What is that on? Oh, that's
Beautiful.
I forget what record that's on.
It's called Azure Eyes.
Azure Eyes, yeah.
Yeah.
That's the title track there. That's what I thought it was.
I love sort of aggressive articulation, even when playing a ballad, and I think I heard that, and with Clifford too. That sort of bra bra, like you don't have to just mumble everything, even if you're playing a ballad.
Yeah, that's interesting. I agree with you. You know, one of my influences was a guy named Tim Higgins, who was on Stan Kemp's band before me. I took his place. Tim's a beautiful player, and we're good friends, even though I don't get to see him very often. But Tim is very aggressive, and those are big shoes to fill when I got on Kenton's band. He went on to other things, and I think I got some of that aggressive articulation from him a bit.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, there was a time when I had to kind of say, I got to stop sounding so much like Tim Higgins. I mean, he had a record come out years later, and a friend of mine came up and said, I heard a guy play and he sounds just like you. And Tim had sent me this record, and I said, no, that's not what's going on there. You know, I said, I sound like him, and I was right.
Yeah, neat.
Yeah, he's a great player.
Okay.
Tim Higgins, yeah.
Okay, here's this actually starts with some piano.
Is that Joe La Barba's band?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. That was probably Bill Cunliffe on piano.
Yeah. So I wanted to ask you about that. What happened there? Because of course, in the whole recording, there's a head, and then I think the sax player plays
Bob Shepard.
Shepard. Then there's this piano solo, and it gets pretty intense.
Uh-huh.
And then you come in, and a lot of space. And I'm wondering, I was thinking, how deliberate and how pre-planned was that?
I wouldn't say pre-planned at all, because I leave a lot of space. I've had people say, man, I like the way you leave space. I've had people, that sometimes if they compliment me, it's because of the space I leave, you know. Pete Erskine said that to me one time. He said, I like how you leave space. So to me, it helps me listen to them, and maybe I can kind of, not that I want them to copy me or mock me or anything like that, but it also gives me ideas when I leave space. Like with Joe never repeats what I play, but it's just like a momentum gathering thing to leave space with Joe, because he's just such a fantastic drummer. And I've always left a lot of space, and I leave more space than a lot of guys, and I try to get my students to leave space. Now sometimes with some players, space is long notes, like with Train You know, or with Rich Perry, he's another tenor player who I love. Rich Perry is one of my favorite tenor players. Rich doesn't leave a ton of space, but his space is long notes, so that's when things start churning. But for me, it's more, I like to leave big gaping holes of space.
Well, it gives you somewhere to go too.
It does, yeah, and it makes me listen.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I felt like for that particular recording that the other players were sort of responding to you, like the piano player sort of laid out for a while.
Right.
I'm not going to mess with what he's doing too much. The best thing I can do is nothing.
That's right.
For the time being.
And he knows, we're real good, and he knows I will travel far and wide to get to play with Joe LaBarbera, you know. Because Joe is one of the most amazing people and amazing drummers, and he loves to play, you know, and he makes people play better, which is the biggest compliment I can say for anybody. You know, I've gotten to play with some really great drummers. He and Jeff Hamilton and Dennis McCrell and Steve Houghton and all these great drummers I've gotten to play with. The guy at Eastman, Rich Thompson, they make you play better, you know. Which Joe's amazing like that.
Where does he live now?
Joe's out in Los Angeles.
Okay.
Yeah.
Here's one last thing. This is
okay.
This is just a personal favorite.
Oh, it's Nat.
Yeah.
Oh.
Talk about playing the blues.
Oh, I love Nat Adderley. Well, one person, it kind of gave it away because I knew it was Cannonball, but I'm a huge, like one of my, that's cornet. I'm a huge Nat Adderley fan. Oh, I love Nat Adderley. One of my, you know, we talked about our Desert Island record, you know, the record with that Cannonball and Nancy Wilson.
Oh, I can't believe you said that.
I mean, Nat's all over that thing. Nat Adderley is one of the most underrated trumpet players. He was so funky and swinging, and he had great chops and a great sound, you know. But every note was swinging with Nat. Oh, I'm a huge fan of Nat Adderley. Yeah.
That's my favorite record.
Oh, I love that record. That's a fantastic record. Oh, I got to ask Nancy Wilson about that one time because she was singing with the Clayton Band, and I had a moment. It was just a gift. I just said, I have to ask you. She said, yeah, people ask me about that all the time. I was like, dang, because I was like, I gotta just. Was that just so fun? And she said, oh, you know, it was Zonal and you know, what a band, you know, and. She said,
and the little arrangements they had behind her.
Man, it was so fantastic.
I'm a big, basically both of them, Adderley nut, and I used to think, when I would listen to their stuff, a lot of times they would do a lot of stuff in unison, and I thought, boy, if I was arranging that, I would have done harmony, and say, well, that's why they're who they are. They sort of knew that.
Oh man,
sounded like one voice.
They were amazing. Yeah. I mean, and you go to see them, and there was a high mic and a low mic. And Cannonball would play at the high mic. and that who was much smaller played on the low mic, right? Oh, man. Yeah, I'm a huge fan of all of them, you know. You know, we were talking about Gene Bertoncini, who I'm a huge fan of, too. He got to do a record with Nancy Wilson. It's called But Beautiful. And it was Gene and Hank Jones and I think Ron Carter and Grady Tate, I want to say, or somebody on drums, you know. And they did it, no solos. There's hardly any. Hank may play 8 bars here and there, but the tunes are super short. And they finished it, and they were going to add strings. And they listened to it, and they decided not to, because it's just so great. And I always, you know, such a credit to Gene that he got to do that kind of stuff. And he's such a great accompanist and such a great player.
Well, okay. Jazz in academia. Every once in a while, your favorite topic, it seems to, every couple years, I think some critic will write, "Jazz is dead." You know, the Jazz is Dead article.
Yeah.
And they cite the abysmal record sales and the club scene. But on the other hand, you have jazz in almost every academic institution in the country. And you go to Jazz Education Network, those conferences, and there's, what you have a sort of a perspective on the state of jazz?
Yeah, I mean, kids that spend, you know, a lot of money at jazz school, I'm kind of torn about that because there's not a lot of work. It's a really hard living. It's really hard to make a living, you know, just playing. And so kids, they kind of try to write and play, or write and play and teach, or now they're talking about, like we're at Eastman, we're starting to have classes to write music for games and that kind of stuff. And, you know, right? So I mean, just finding ways to be more versatile and etc. But on the other hand, my guys are, and I have lovely people. Students are just the best. They're great kids. They're very respectful, and they're very respectful of the legacy, and then they bring in this new stuff. And lately, the stuff they've been bringing it in, I just love the stuff they've been bringing in. Years ago, some of us felt sort of self-involved and hard to understand. They were real hard meters, and it was really hard to play. And we needed that because now the meters don't sound so hard, the odd meters, and our kids just play that kind of stuff. But especially just this year, they brought in stuff and played for me, and I just, wow, I really like it. And it's been really inspirational to me. So I don't know where it's going in terms of the business, but I certainly think it's growing in terms of the players. Because in terms of, all I know is my students, but they're very respectful of the legacy. Very respectful. They never say, I don't want to play that old, I don't want to play Gone with the Wind. Why would, they're all about that stuff. And I have them study older players like Louis Armstrong and Sweets. And I tell them, I don't want you to necessarily play like that, but I want you to have them in your playing. That's the way we approach it. Professionally, every once in a while for a recording session, they may be called on to play just like Sweets Edison, and that'll pay off. But that's not the essence of what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to get Sweets Edison in there playing, you know, because he wasn't in mine at first. That was a hole I had to fill. So my students have been so respectful of that, but then surging ahead. And they learn really fast. They're so far ahead of where I was when I was their age. It's not even funny. They're so far ahead of I couldn't play like my kids play when I was a junior in college. Nowhere close. I couldn't play the way that some of them play when I was out on the road with Kim. Nowhere close. They play much better. So I think it's accessibility, or they've learned how to absorb better, or they're playing really hard music really well. So I think the music can't do anything but grow and germinate and be better. I'm not pessimistic about it. The business, yeah, but they'll find a way. Because they were saying that when I was coming out of college. Oh, you know, you're not going to make a living doing this. And I've had a very nice career of it, you know. So,
do you require them to memorize a certain number of standards?
I'm kind of I'm kind of a numbers guy. I like my students to know a lot of tunes. I shoot for 100. and that's a lot. And some of my colleagues even say, that seems like But I've learned as a horn player, when you know some obscure monk tune and somebody calls their favorite monk tune and you know it, you're in the club. And so it really pays off to know not just harmonies, but like you might know 8. I got rhythm tunes, but if a guy wants to play Moose and Mooch, then you got to know the head to Moose the Mooch, and especially bird tunes and monk tunes. I'm very strict about it, and I bug my students to really get in there and learn those things because it's really paid off for me in terms of work, So yeah, plus they need to learn how to learn those tunes because when they go and learn hard original tunes, they're going to have to play them, and they're going to have to know how to learn them. And I think they learn how to learn that by learning standards. And these kids are smart, and they learn fast. I've got a kid at Eastman now. His name's Christian Crawford is his name, and I assigned that bird tune Quasimodo, which is a tune on Embraceable You. But he learned it in a week. That tune took me a month to learn that tune, and I was really working on it. He learned it in a week. He had it down, So they know that's just my thing. But yeah, I do. Long answer to your question. Yes, I really require they learn a ton. Yeah. A lot of standards, a lot of them, and not just the regular ones.
Not just blue bossa.
No.
Do the jazz students at Eastman and even the faculty, do you feel like more of a clannish clique at Eastman? Are you separate from the classical world or not?
I've got to say that's one thing I love about Eastman is generally speaking, no. The trumpet teacher there is one of the classical trumpet teacher, the main guy, is one of the best trumpet players I've ever heard in my life. His name's Jim Thompson, and he's so respectful of the jazz. Now, that's not always the case in schools, but Jim is so respectful to me and of the jazz thing, and he's not a jazz player whatsoever. Mm-hmm. So I think in some schools it is an issue. It definitely is. Like, you can't play in the big band because you have a recital this semester, and that kind of stuff. Jim would never say that. He couldn't care less about that.
So some players do both.
Oh, sure. And sometimes the jazz guys are a little bit better versed at playing in a brass quintet than the brass quintet guys are because of style more than anything. So that's something that we work on. And I give studio classes with his students all the time. Because he's of the opinion that in the future, and I agree with him, in the future, a symphonic trumpet section, it might consist of a principal player and a second player, and then a guy that can play lead on some pop stuff, and then a guy can stand up and play changes and not sound silly, as well as be a good fourth trumpet player in a symphony. I mean, that's smart. All right?
Yes, it is.
It's very smart.
Because students still do the classical path first.
Oh, sure, especially on specific instruments like trumpet. I think that's important because you need to be a good classical player to be a good jazz player. Otherwise, the horn's going to get in your way. Now, other instruments, not so much. Drummers don't have to be great mallet players, or guitar players may not need to have classical chops necessarily. I don't know. I don't want to speak for them. Bass players, I think, need to have good arco bowing technique, and they need to have good classical technique, and it's tried and true technique. John Clayton's a beautiful classical player. Jeff Campbell, the jazz teacher at Eastman, he's in the RPO. He's a beautiful player, and you can hear it in his pitch and stuff, in his dexterity and in articulation. You can hear it. You can hear that he's a really great bass player, and he got that from being a good classical player. So yeah, I think we need to go through that. That's another thing I like about Eastman. The kids have to pass, like the piano players, they have to pass some classical barriers. They just do. That's just part of it. So that's the thing I love about it. Now, I'm sure there are faculty at Eastman the jazzers, but generally speaking, and the administration is incredibly supportive of the jazz department. So that's one thing I actually really like about it, more so than other schools.
I got to play with, when I was in high school in Rochester, Chuck Mangione was sort of an all-county thing.
Oh, cool. Mm-hmm.
And this was before he became...
Oh, is that right?
Yeah, just before. I wonder if does he have a legacy at Eastman of a sort?
To a degree.
Yeah.
To a degree. Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
It's respectful of him. I don't really know him,
Mm-hmm.
but he had a hand in getting things going, I think.
Yeah.
I do. I think he was, and his brother Gap.
Yes.
You know? No, you can't take that away. And he played with Chuck Mangione. He played with Blakey, and you know.
And Cannonball discovered them.
Oh, is that right?
The Jazz Brothers.
Oh.
Cannonball brought him to Riverside Records.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, he did the pop thing and all
Yeah,
that, but
right.
I think he was definitely
Yeah.
was a part of the Eastman jazz
Yeah.
legacy. Sure.
Well, is there anything that I haven't asked you that you'd like to offer?
Just honored to be here. Thankful for people like you that care enough about this to, because I'm not a huge name, and I'm just humbled by all these pictures and the fact that you are doing this is amazing to me. And you're studied and you're prepared and you're respectful of it. And we all so appreciate people like you. Can't tell you.
Thanks. On the gig tonight, do you get to call the tunes?
Well, I sent several of the things I do.
Mm-hmm.
Some of our obscure bird and monk tunes. And Mike Devanowitz, who was a student of ours at Eastman, I sent a few of my originals, and he was great. He rehearsed the band, and he set up 2 sets for tonight and he kind of picked out of the stuff I sent, because I left it up to him because he knows his guys, and they were going to do a couple of arrangements of his. So indirectly, yes, but I left it up to him for what he would be comfortable with. I sent some stuff that's not very hard, and he set up 2 great sets. So it's going to be. I think it'd be a lot of fun.
Yeah, should be. All right. Well, thanks for your time today.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Pleasure for me.